Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
What's going on? Welcome into the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thank you for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's YouTube, Indy's Sports Ticket. You can head over there and subscribe. Maybe you're watching on X, _ Jonathan Smith to follow me there and watch the show there. You can also listen on that Indy Sports Ticket app, which you can download wherever you find your apps. Hope you had a nice weekend. I know I did. Went down to Kentucky Kingdom on Saturday, rode a bunch of rides, dodged the rain. It was a really good time. And then yesterday, I slept all day. Seriously, took a 3-hour nap after church, and that was just, so lovely. And then after that, I went on a walk, and I really enjoy my Sunday night walks, especially during this time of the year when there's not a ton of stuff going on, because takes just kind of come to me. And I was thinking about the Pacers in the offseason because free agency technically starts tonight. This is when guys can officially sign deals, and all the trades that you have seen made, they should all officially go through tonight. And obviously the Pacers in this upcoming offseason, it's a big one because Miles Turner is going to sign a new deal for probably somewhere around $30 million a year. I read something this morning. Bobby Marks said that, Miles Turner should sign a deal like $75 million over 3 years. I think that's absurd. It's going to be closer to $30 million a year than it is 25 when you just look at the market for other centers. And once that happens, the Pacers will go into what is known as the first apron, right? So they're about $27 million short of that right now. Obviously, as soon as they sign Miles Turner, if it is $30 million a year, which it seems like it's going to be, that then puts them into the first apron. And without getting too into the nitty gritty, right? Essentially, once you enter the first apron, you then become restricted in terms of some of the moves that you can and can't make. Salaries and trades have to be, like a little more even whenever you make trades. So, like, for example, if you're not in the first apron, you are allowed to receive 125% of whatever your outgoing salary is. Okay, but if you're in the first apron, you can no longer do that. If you're in the first apron, you can't acquire players via sign and trade unless the incoming salary would then move you back down below the apron. Teams in the first apron can't sign a player during the regular season off waivers if their previous salary is over the mid-level exception, which is $12 million. Also, if you're in the first apron, then your mid-level exception is reduced to $5 million with a 2-year max for players to sign with. Okay, so it makes it a little bit tougher to make trades and sign players and all those other things, right? And on top of that, you have to pay the luxury tax. Okay, and look, why would Herb Simon want to pay the luxury tax in a year where they can't win the whole thing? I think if you're an owner, that is an outstanding question to ask yourself, because let's just be honest, without Tyrese Halliburton, you're not winning the finals. Like, there's not a free agent available that is going to elevate your team to a point where you can, go back to the finals and potentially win the whole thing. Really like Cam Jones, who the Pacers took with the 38th pick. I don't think he's going to elevate the Pacers to a point where they can win the whole thing. Like, that's just not in the cards for them this year. And so I think in terms of winning the NBA Finals, you have to think 2 years ahead instead of one. And as soon as the Pacers re-sign Miles Turner, they will be in the first apron, which would restrict their ability to build for 2 years from now when they actually have a chance to win the title again, right? Like, it becomes tougher to sign players. It becomes tougher to trade for players. And with that being said, the Pacers need Miles Turner. I get it. He wasn't very good in the finals, and people are going to, bring that up time and time again, and it's going to become really annoying because he was really good in the first 3 rounds of the playoffs. He was so bad that he was the starting center on an NBA Finals team. That's how bad Miles Turner was. And so they have to have him if they want to try to make another run at it when Tyrese Halliburton comes back in a little over a year. With that being said, I bring all this up to move into something that I think could happen this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Pacers make a trade to dump some salary to avoid the luxury tax and to avoid being in the first apron. because it's not just about, this year, but it's also about 2 years from now, because there are players, important players, that are up for some extensions. Like right now, if the Pacers wanted to, they could extend Aaron Nesmith. They could extend Benedict Mathurin. They could extend Jarris Walker. They could extend Ben Shepherd. All four of those players are extension eligible right now. And all four of those guys are probably due for some raises. Aaron Nesmith is going to get a raise, and he should, because he's emerged as a really good two-way player. And if the Pacers don't want to pay him, then somebody else will. I have no doubt about it. Benedict Mathurin, he deserves a raise. Really good player, right? A guy who's been in it for sixth man of the year. A player who seems like he could fit a bigger role going forward. Okay, he's going to play a lot this year. His numbers are going to be really good just because he's going to have the ball more with no Tyrese Halliburton. Like, he's going to be looking for a raise and a contract extension. Jarris Walker, if he's good this year, by the way, we've seen improvement from last year to this year. A guy who's shooting, around 40% from three for his career. A guy who potentially is going to be a really good defender. A guy who's got some playmaking ability that I think we're going to get to see a little bit of this year. Ben Shepherd, another pretty solid two-way guy that the Pacers have trusted these last 2 years to play like legitimate NBA playoff minutes. All four of those guys seem like players that you would want to keep around. And more importantly, all four of those players are guys that if you do keep around, they're going to demand a little bit more money. So I bring all that up as well to further emphasize the fact that the Pacers are going to be in the first apron after they do all of these extensions. And once again, you don't want to be in the first apron because it restricts some of your ability to be flexible and to add players and trade players and do those important things. I think there's a pretty decent chance that we see Obi Toppin or Benedict Mathurin traded this offseason as salary dumps to remain below that first apron. Okay, Obi Toppin making around $14 million a year. He's 27 years old. Benedict Mathurin's making $9 million this next season, and he's 23 years old. And there's questions with like, how do the Pacers view Benedict Mathurin? Do they view him as a legitimate cornerstone? He's going to be part of the franchise for the next decade. Do they view him that way, or do they view him as he's a pretty good player, but I think we can find another guy who can come in off the bench and score. I think that he was the number 6 overall pick, and people don't want to be wrong about whoever they take 6th overall. And obviously they like him if they took him that high. So I think that they want to keep him around. Which leads me to say that I think there's a pretty decent chance that the Pacers move Obi Toppin this offseason. He's making $14 million this year. Benedict Mathurin, he's making a little over 9. Obi Toppin, 27. Benedict Mathurin, 23. And why would you trade the player with a higher ceiling that's tougher to replace? Like, we know exactly who Obi Toppin is right now. Okay? He's a power forward who runs the floor really well and can make open threes. He's not the best defender. He's a pretty good rebounder. And that's it. And what is Benedict Mathurin right now? He's a guy who can come in off the bench in the NBA Finals and score 27 points in 22 minutes. He's a guy who, as he continues to become a better shooter, is only going to become a better scorer. We know Benedict Mathurin's an absolute dog on both ends of the floor, a guy who really improved defensively from last year to this year. Like that is the kind of guy that you want to keep around. Obi Toppin is the guy that I would trade. Older, easier skill set to replace, and he costs more. That's the very simple reality of who Obi Toppin is, and while he was very important for the Pacers in this playoff run, he's pretty replaceable. In fact, the Pacers have his replacement on the roster right now. Jarris Walker is just waiting in the wings, waiting for his opportunity. And obviously when you have Pascal Siakam, who's a really good player and obviously going to start at power forward, and you have Obi Toppin, it becomes tougher to find space for Jarris Walker to get to play. But if they move Toppin, that obviously opens up opportunities for a much cheaper player to play more minutes and potentially emerge. Right? And if there's any year you want him to emerge and you want him to get more minutes and you want him to get used to playing, like, that would be this year when you don't really have much of a chance of winning a title. So when he makes mistakes, because he's going to, they aren't as detrimental as they could be, during the year where you're trying to, be like a top 3 seed and you're trying to make a run to the NBA Finals. Excuse me. And so don't be surprised if the Pacers decide to move Obi Toppin at some point in this offseason. Also, Benedict Mathurin, if you move him, who's his replacement? No one. It's the answer. I was tweeted at this morning by Joe Humke. Shout out. I like Joe. Very, very nice guy. And, he sent over this article that was titled something along the lines of Pacers linked to former number 1 pick in free agency by Newsweek. And, Newsweek is just looking for clicks because I read the article and I found it to be nothing short of absurd. And Joe Humke asked a really good question attached to that link. He said, would the Pacers be a good fit for Ben Simmons or DeAndre Ayton? And if you read the article, you shouldn't because it's terrible. They're basically laying out this case for the Pacers to go sign Ben Simmons, who's going to be really cheap. It's the last guy that they need. Okay, who wants tall guards who can't shoot? Not me. He used to be an all-world level defender, and then he woke up one day and he's like, you know what I actually don't like to do? I actually don't like playing basketball. I just want to show up in my cool outfit, and I want to sit on the bench, and I want everyone to see me in my cool outfit. And then in the offseason, I'm going to post all these really cool workout videos of me working on my game and making jump shots and, all this really cool stuff. And then, it's always captioned scary hours loading, and then these other accounts that just kind of repost stuff, they'll find it. And they're just like, oh, Ben Simmons working on his game. What a guy. Absolutely not. I would be stunned if the Pacers went out and signed Ben Simmons. He's simply not worth the hassle. Who wants to bring a guy in who doesn't like playing basketball? Not me. Not me. And then the DeAndre Ayton thing is interesting. I would hate it if the Pacers brought in DeAndre Ayton, and I understand that I've been talking about the Pacers' need for a backup center and all these things. I don't like DeAndre Ayton. I think he's a waste of a lot of talent. With that being said, talent's hard to find, especially cheap talent. For those unaware, DeAndre Ayton was bought out by the Portland Trail Blazers, which makes a lot of sense because they've drafted a center 2 years in a row now. And the Pacers like DeAndre Ayton's talents. And I know that for a fact. So, well, Jonathan, how do you know that? I know that because they offered him a contract a few years ago. He was a restricted free agent, okay? And they let him test the market. And when you're a restricted free agent and you test the market, if someone offers you a contract, whatever team you were previously playing for, they have an opportunity to match. And if they match, you have to go back and play with the team that you were originally on. So I don't remember what the number was, but the Pacers offered DeAndre Ayton a contract. The Suns matched, and so he continued to play for the Suns. And the Pacers are praising, the Lord because the Suns matched, and the Suns are like, why didn't we just let him walk? Because they traded him the next season. So, with that being said, the Pacers clearly like the talent that DeAndre Ayton has, and who doesn't? He's 7 feet tall. He moves really well. He's got really nice touch around the bucket. He can step out to 15 feet, and he can not knock it in. The issue is he's not competitive, and he doesn't play hard. Okay? And there's nothing that sums up DeAndre Ayton better these past couple of years than his quote after he got drafted. So he gets drafted number 1 overall. Number 1 overall. And, he's, doing the whole post, draft interview thing. And someone asks him, hey, man, what's your biggest goal? What is your NBA goal? Do you want to win a championship? Do you want to be an all-star? Do you want to win Defensive Player of the Year? What's your NBA goal? And in most of these spots, guys take the opportunity to say something like, I want to be the best player ever. I want to win, 7 titles or whatever it is. Not DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton said that his goal was to, quote, get a second contract, end quote. That was his goal. I just want to get to my second contract because that's when the money really starts coming in. And for DeAndre Ayton, that money definitely started coming in, and the losses started piling up for whoever was paying him. Doesn't sound like the kind of guy that the Indiana Pacers want. At least that's not what I think. If you head over to YouTube, Indy Sports Ticket, and you, first of all, you should subscribe. Secondly, you should hop in the chat, and you should talk, and you should, get in on this conversation. Ross and Ridger talking about Jarris Walker. Ridger saying that I personally don't think Jarris Walker could ever be more than a role player. That's fine. Like, he doesn't have to be some crazy star. I think he's got a little more to him than Obi Toppin, because that's the thing, right? Like, if he just replaces Obi Toppin, if he just replaces those minutes, like, Obi Toppin is a role player. And if Jarris Walker can come in off the bench and fill the same role of running in transition, finishing at the rim, and making threes, which he did at like a 40% clip this last year, then I think the Pacers would be very happy with that. I think they'd be extremely happy with that. Hey, we're paying this guy less money to do what Obi Toppin was doing. That's perfect. With that being said, I do like a lot about Jarris Walker's game. I think that there's a lot we haven't seen from him quite yet. Like, he's a really good passer. Like, he's got good vision. There's some times where the passes are a little lazy and they're not as crisp as they need to be. And because of that, it's tough to trust him with the ball. But I do think we're going to see him play a lot more this year, and I do think that we're going to see him with the ball in his hands a little bit more. I don't know how much offense they're really going to let him initiate, but he's a good passer, definitely a better one than Obi Toppin, and he projects. And look, I get it, projection, potential, like that is the magic word to get anybody to buy in on anything. But he projects as a guy who can be a very good defender. Okay, and I feel like I keep going back to this thing, not on the air because I don't talk about Jarris Walker a ton on the air, but like with my friends who don't like Jarris Walker, do you guys just like not remember the Clippers game his rookie year where he defended Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and did a really great job defending both of them, right? So he's shown some glimpses of like, hey, I can be a really good defender, definitely better than any sort of defender Obi Toppin has ever been in his career. So I like Jarris Walker. The idea of the Pacers moving Obi Toppin, I think makes a lot of sense. We'll see if it happens or not, but I do think it makes a decent amount of sense for this Indiana Pacers team who's not going to be able to win a title this season. When we come back, speaking of winning titles, Malik Beasley trying to win the gambling title. That story broke over the weekend. We'll get into it when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
More than 200 members of Congress are standing up for AM radio listeners. The AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act will keep AM radio in cars, because when cell and internet services are down, This free service could be your only lifeline. Text AM to 39179. Tell Congress to pass this critical legislation now.
Message and data rates may apply. You may receive up to 4 messages a month, and you may text STOP to stop.
This message furnished by the National Association of Broadcasters.
The best takes. Maybe. The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thank you for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's YouTube, Indy's Sports Ticket. Oh, man. Head over there, subscribe. You can also watch on X__Jonathan Smith to follow me there and watch the show there. You can also listen via that Indy Sports Ticket app, which you can download wherever you find your apps. Monday, just get to Friday, people. You're off. Nice little short week. July 4th is coming up. I'll be in Chicago, heading there this weekend. Can't wait. My wife has never been to the best ballpark on the planet, Wrigley Field. And so I'm taking her. We're going. It's going to be good. And I think we're going to spend the whole weekend there. So if you have Chicago recommendations, I will gladly take them. If you have any gambling recommendations, I think Malik Beasley will take them, as he is now under investigation for gambling on NBA games. Real bummer for him. Pistons were going to bring it back at like 3 years, $42 million. It's a nice little chunk of change. I mean, you have to live in Detroit to make that happen. But still, though, I that's a lot of money that he's going to miss out on because he wanted to bet on NBA games, which I still can't believe the guys do this. I kind of get it. It's nice to be able to gamble, and there's all these clips surfacing of, there's a game where like his team's going to lose by 9 and they were 8.5-point underdogs. And so he takes off after the ball gets inbounded and he runs down the middle of the floor. No one guards him and he lays it in. Boom. But the covering bet cashed, and like all these different clips of him are showing up, and it's kind of funny. And I still can't believe the guys are doing this. Especially after what happened to Jonte Porter, where they just banned him from the league. Like, that was the punishment. They banned him from the league. They're like, you are done. You can never come back. And Malik Beasley was like, I don't think they'll catch me. Yes, they will. Okay. So easy to track all of that stuff now. So we'll see what ends up happening to Malik Beasley. He hasn't officially been deemed guilty yet. So we'll see. But where there's smoke, there's usually fire. Not always, but there tends to be some fire wherever there's smoke. And there's certainly a lot of smoke around Malik Beasley between not only the investigation, but also the fact that the Detroit Pistons backed off of that original offer to potentially bring him in for, 3 more years. And I was thinking about this last night as I switch gears a little bit here. College football is right around the corner. Indiana obviously coming off a good season where they make the college football playoff, and they only lose 2 games all year. One to Ohio State, who won the whole thing, and the other to Notre Dame, who played Ohio State for the whole thing. And Indiana was a lot of fun to follow last year. They were fun to talk about. I love college football. Just being from the South, college football it is in my blood. It is in my veins. My earliest memories with my dad and my brother are sitting on the couch watching Darren McFadden and Felix Jones both run for a million yards each against everybody. And so I love college football, and I just remember going into last year. But new coach, no one cared. No one cared at all about how good Indiana football was going to be last year until they were. You remember Coach Signetti complaining about people leaving at halftime? He's like, you guys need to stay. You guys need to stay for the whole game, all this kind of stuff, because people were leaving at halftime, because that is the Indiana football way. That is the Indiana football way. And they end up being really good. And so once Big Ten play rolls around, people start paying attention and they're winning, and then, they get blown out by Ohio State, but they beat Nebraska for the first time in forever. And that's a big deal, and all this kind of stuff. And my question is, how good does IU football have to be for people to continue to care? And how long do they have to be good for people to consistently care? I seriously, I know that they're bringing in Zach Calzada, and he's supposed to be an absolute stud playing quarterback for Indiana football this next year, and all this kind of stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if people left it at halftime of games again this year, because it's still a basketball school. I saw more stuff this weekend on some new 4-star named Prince Alexander Moody, who's not even going to play for Indiana basketball this year. Right, he's the first, commit of the Darian DeVries era. He'll be a freshman, in the 2026 season. I saw more people talking about him. I saw more coverage on him than I have all offseason for Indiana football. The spring game happened, I heard nothing about it, saw nothing about it. And I do think people are kind of excited for Indiana football, but it doesn't feel the same compared to other places, because Indiana is still very much a basketball school. Okay. With that being said, Indiana football is also not going to be as good this year as they were last year. The schedule is much tougher. Okay. And look, let's just be honest. Your schedule in college football matters a lot, because if your toughest game is Ohio State, and your second toughest game is 6-6 Nebraska, and you're a halfway decent football team, you can go 11-1, make the college football playoff, and get blown out in the first round like Indiana football did last year. Their schedule, much tougher. They're going to beat Old Dominion. They're going to beat Kennesaw State. They're going to beat Indiana State. Those are their 3 non-conference games. And then they play Illinois. Not an easy game. Brett Bielema's building a really good program over at Illinois. And then Indiana's at Iowa. Good luck. Iowa, good football team, capable of beating anyone in the country. And then they're at Oregon. That's on October 11th. They're at Oregon. And you're not winning that one. I tell you that right now. Unless some injury happens to someone at Oregon, you're not winning that one. And then you get Michigan State at home. That game's very winnable. And then you get UCLA at home. That game's very winnable. And then you're at Maryland. That game's probably pretty winnable. And then you're at Penn State. You're probably not going to win that one. And then you get Wisconsin at home. You should win that one. And then you're at Purdue. We'll see how Barry Odom does in his first year. If Indiana goes like 9-3 or 8-4, and they miss the college football playoff, will people still be interested? Like, will I still be talking about the great Coach Cignetti and this Indiana football program when November rolls around? Because that's when Indiana basketball starts. November 9th, as of right now, is their earliest game of the season. And guess who they play? Marquette in Chicago. If they win that game, because Marquette's going to be good, like that's just kind of what I expect from Marquette, especially when you have a head coach like Shaka Smart leading the way. I expect for Marquette to be good from the jump. So if, Indiana's, 6-3, let me see how many games would they have played on November 9th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if they're, let's call it like they're 7-3 and they just got trounced by Penn State, who by all accounts should be awesome this next season. And then, they get crushed on Saturday, November 8th, and then they turn around Sunday, November 9th, and Indiana basketball, first game of the Coach DeVries era, and they beat Marquette. Are people still really going to be interested in Indiana football, or is it going to have to be another year of 10-2, sneak into the college football playoff, and then lose in the first round again? Look, I fully believe that if Indiana wins that basketball game on November 9th, and Indiana football is anything less than 8-2, then they're going to steal all the attention from a football team that I really expect to take a step back this next year. Not because, they're not going to be a better team, because they might be. Like, they might be a little more talented. Like I said, by all accounts, this Calzada kid who transferred in from Cal, who I think went like 6-6 last year, like they're going to be a little more talented at quarterback, and like we'll see how the rest of the team looks. But look, if you get an upgraded quarterback, usually your team's going to be a little bit better. I'm just not convinced that this team's going to be super great. I don't think that they're going 11-1. I think if 10-2, maybe. Probably more like 9-3 or 8-4 though. Like if they started 1-2 in conference play, that would not surprise me in the slightest. Like if they lost at Iowa and they lost at Oregon and they beat Illinois, or if they lost to Illinois and they won at Iowa and they won at, if they lost to Illinois, won at Iowa, and then lost at Oregon, like that wouldn't be the most surprising thing. And I think that if that were to happen, then all of the excitement and the energy around Indiana would simmer down pretty quickly, right? Because you're 1-2 in conference play, and then you don't really have an opportunity for a big momentum shifting win again until Saturday, November 8th, the day before Indiana basketball starts. So we'll see how it goes. I'm very intrigued to see how Indiana football is received this season, especially if they get off to a somewhat slow start in Big Ten play. Good news, if you just win all the games that you're supposed to, so pretty much every game except for the Penn State and the Oregon games, then, Indiana will probably make the college football playoff again, and, we'll see kind of what happens from there. Speaking of, let's see what happens. I was looking at some of the NFL stuff last night, and I want to believe so badly that the Colts are going to hit the over on that 7.5 win total. But they're not good. That's the issue I keep running into. I keep looking at the rest of the NFL, and I'm just like, I don't think the Colts are very good. And I think it's really hard for teams that aren't very good to win 8 games, especially when the Colts schedule is a little bit tougher this year than it was last year. So I've made a list of teams that the Colts are definitely not better than, of teams that I doubt the Colts will be better than, of teams that I wouldn't be surprised if these teams were better than the Colts. And then I've got a very short list of teams that I think the Colts are most definitely better than. I will give you that list when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
fits in today's sports world. It's here. The real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
Welcome back to the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thank you for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's YouTube, X, or the Indy Sports Ticket app. You can download wherever you find your apps. No matter how you're tuning in, it is always greatly, greatly appreciated. Breaking news, Jalen Ramsey traded from the Miami Dolphins to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's really kind of perfect timing because I was about to get into this list that I had made, or I guess it's 4 separate lists of teams that are better than, I think are better than, should probably be better than the Colts, and teams that are definitely not better than the Colts. Because I want so badly to believe that the Colts can get to 8 wins. Because it would be over 7.5. I want so badly to believe that this Colts team has a chance at making the playoffs, and I just can't get there. Trust me, I'm trying so hard. I want to get there so badly. But the Colts are simply not better than the Buffalo Bills, the Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers before they added Jalen Ramsey. Now they're bringing in Jalen Ramsey. That defense is going to be tough. They clearly very much believe in Aaron Rodgers. Because obviously, you don't make that trade. They are very much trying to win now, and it makes sense because a lot of their better players, Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Aaron Rodgers now, a lot of their better players are older. And, if there's any time, I go for it now, I guess. So, but with that being said, the Colts are not better than Pittsburgh. They're not better than the Texans. They're not better than the Chiefs. They're not better than the Chargers. They're not better than the Broncos or the Eagles or the Commanders or the Lions or the Packers or the Rams or the 49ers. Every team I just listed has a better quarterback than the Colts do. They probably have a better coach. And I like a lot of these defenses more than I like the Colts as well. Seriously. All those teams, you couldn't convince me. You couldn't convince me any of those teams are worse than the Colts. I doubt that the Colts are going to be better than the Vikings. They obviously have to answer that J.J. McCarthy question, is he going to be the guy? Kevin O'Connell just seems to take quarterbacks. They show up, and all of a sudden, they're really good. I doubt that the Colts are going to be better than the Patriots. And I say that, and you're like, the Patriots? They were bad. Yeah, you're right. They were bad, but they just added, a left tackle with the 3rd overall pick in the NFL draft, or the 4th pick, excuse me. Drake May was really good last year in the snaps that he got. Mike Vrabel's one of the best head coaches in the NFL, right? It's he's going to have them ready to go. I would be surprised if the Colts were better than the Patriots. I doubt that the Colts are going to be better than the Bengals, Joe Burrow, and I had to put them in this category because they've missed the playoffs every year now since they made it to the. Actually, that's not true. They've missed the playoffs 2 years in a row now. Right, but let's be honest. Joe Burrow, those receivers, they're going to be better than the Colts. I'd be surprised if the Colts were better than the Cowboys. I think the Cowboys are going to be much better this year than they were last year. I'd be surprised if the Colts were better than the Bears. New head coach, if Ben Johnson shows up and is everything that he was in Detroit, in Chicago, then the Bears are going to be pretty good. They have a lot of talent. The issue is they had Matt Eberflus as their head coach last year. Okay, I'd be surprised if they were better than the Buccaneers, who just seem to win 10 games every year. I'd be surprised if the Colts were better than the Seahawks. Obviously, Sam Darnold has to answer some questions. They got some offensive line questions as well. But if those questions are answered correctly, then all those teams are going to be better than the Indianapolis Colts. And then you get down to this other tier where it's yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if these teams were better than the Colts. There's definitely a world where they're not. For example, I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins just scored 1 million points this year and they were better than the Colts. They still have Jalen Waddle. They still have Tyreek Hill. They still have Tua. They still have Mike McDaniel. They still run the ball pretty well, right? They're still a highly, highly explosive team, and I get it. They just gave away Jalen Ramsey, but he wasn't very good last year. If Jalen Phillips stays healthy, that's one of the better young pass rushers in the NFL. I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins were better than the Colts, even though there's certainly a world where the Colts are better than them. The Jaguars, they hire a new head coach in Liam Cohen. If he's, he helped, Baker Mayfield put together the best year of his career. If he helps Trevor Lawrence do the same thing, and if Travis Hunter ends up being a guy who can play on both sides of the ball well, I wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars were better than the Colts. The Raiders, the defense was decent last year. They still need some help on the back end of it, but they've got a defensive line that can rush the passer. They have a real quarterback now, Geno Smith. No more Aiden O'Connell. They're very happy about that. Geno Smith's been like a fringe top 10 quarterback in the NFL for the past few years now. Pete Carroll, that's a real head coach. I wouldn't be surprised if the Raiders were better than the Colts this year. Okay, the Falcons, if Michael Penix is good, then the Falcons could definitely be better than the Colts. The Cardinals, if Kyler Murray stays healthy, they could definitely be better than the Colts. The list of teams that the Colts are absolutely better than is incredibly short. It's the Saints, it's the Panthers, it's the Jets, it's the Browns, it's the Titans, and it's the Giants. That's the list. Those are the list of teams that you can sit down and you can look at and you can say, hey, those 6 teams are definitely worse than the Colts are. And if that's the whole list, then are we sure that this Colts team is going to make the playoffs? Are we sure that this Colts team is really, going to be good? Are we sure that this Colts team is really going to win 8 games? I'm just not convinced that is what is going to happen. And, I hope I'm wrong. I hope they win 12 games, and I hope that we're talking about them deep into the playoffs. That would be wonderful. Don't think that that's what's going to happen, though. I think this Colts team is going to be bad, and we're going to have a brand new regime here in Indy next season. No more Chris Ballard, no more Shane Steichen. Instead, we're talking about some new general manager, and, we'll see how it goes. So, last week, I was nice to the Colts. I was, was very, not impressed, but talked about their offseason. It was going relatively normal. And, there was some concern around Anthony Richardson's shoulder, flying him out to LA, going back to that shoulder specialist, and that cleared up. He's going to be ready for training camp. He's going to be healthy. We're going to have a real quarterback competition here, when Colts training camp starts up here in 3 weeks or so, which is nice. And, like I said, normal or relatively normal offseason, right? Nothing out of the ordinary was going on. No one's in trouble for gambling or anything like that. And then Zaire Franklin just had to open up his Twitter account. I don't know why, but he just had to do it. He also went on Joe Budden's podcast and said some very stupid things. I'll let you go find that. And someone tweeted at Zaire Franklin and said, which team are you going to call out this year? Last year it was the Giants, and they dropped 45 points on us. And then, just typical Colts stuff. Zaire Franklin, a.k.a. Ziggy Smalls, over there on X, he tweeted in response to this Giants remark, I spoke on the Titans too, and we swept them. So now what? Oh, my gosh. Just tone deaf, dumb. No need to respond to that. Come on, man. No one cares that you swept the Titans. Is this what the Colts have been reduced down to? Hey, we swept the worst team in the NFL. I don't know. I remember growing up, the Colts being you just kind of expected them to make the playoffs. You expected them to play for an AFC, championship every year. You expected to get Tom Brady versus Peyton Manning. And then, you reach this point where it's I think we're going to get Andrew Luck versus Tom Brady every year because, Andrew Luck seems like he's going to be pretty good and all that kind of stuff. That was the standard. Now, the standard for the Colts is we swept the Titans. This is from the leader of the Indianapolis Colts defense, Zaire Franklin. Congratulations, man. You did what you were supposed to do. You went 2-0 against the worst team in the NFL. Congratulations, man. Huh. That's like Indiana basketball bragging about beating Rutgers. It's like Purdue basketball bragging about, winning in the round of 64. I guess. I don't know. Let me take that back. They actually kind of struggle in the round of 64. So let me take that back. Let's go back to that. It's like Indiana basketball bragging about beating Rutgers. Like, congratulations. You're supposed to do that. Believe it or not, Zaire Franklin, you're supposed to sweep the Titans when they're the worst team in the NFL. Okay? It's just more nonsense. And of course it happens. Like 2 days after I sit in this very chair and I say, hey, the Colts are having like a pretty normal offseason. That's a really good thing for them. That's not normal. Usually, stuff like this is happening all the time. And it is just, it's incredible to me. It's incredible. You haven't made the playoffs in 5 years. And you're bragging about sweeping the worst team in the NFL. Like, who cares? Come on, man. I just, ugh. But this is what bad teams do. Okay? This is what bad teams do. Bad teams are loud. All this kind of stuff. I heard this quote, or my dad told me this one time. And, I'll never forget my dad, him telling me, Jonathan, poor people want you to think that they have money, and rich people want you to think that they don't have any money. And it's a really interesting thing. And I feel like it's the same thing with bad teams and good teams. Bad teams want you to think that they're good. That's why Zaire Franklin is yelling about how they swept the Titans last year. Congratulations. And it's why teams like the Chiefs, haven't heard anything from them all offseason, which they're not the best example because they usually have some guys getting arrested. But, haven't heard anything from the Bills the past few off seasons. Haven't, heard much from the Eagles. Guys get drafted by the Eagles and all of a sudden they just stop speeding. It's pretty amazing, honestly. Haven't heard anything too crazy from anyone who's playing for the Vikings. All the good teams keep their mouths shut and they just go to work. It's pretty incredible. The Chargers, they got serious, brought in Jim Harbaugh, drafted Justin Herbert. Haven't heard anything from them. And in these past couple of off seasons, Broncos hired Sean Payton, got rid of Russell Wilson, brought in Bo Nix. They were really good last year. And you know what they didn't do? They didn't, they haven't announced anything. They haven't said anything crazy. The Commanders, haven't heard a peep from them all off season. All off season. The Rams, Sean McVay, and, Matthew Stafford, a team that thinks that they're good enough to win the Super Bowl this year. You know what I haven't heard them do? Brag about sweeping the Cardinals or any other bad team that they played last year. Haven't heard any of it. But no, our fearless leader, Zaire Franklin, he just had to say something about sweeping the Titans. The same team that lost to the frickin' New York Giants. They just had to do it. He just couldn't keep his mouth shut. And what makes it even better is that this is coming from a player that's not even that good. Congratulations, Zaire Franklin. You swept the Titans this last season, and you lead the NFL. And you lead the NFL in missed tackles since 2023. Details of that Jalen Ramsey trade just came out. In exchange for Jalen Ramsey, the Steelers traded Minkah Fitzpatrick. Wow, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of surprising. Man, Minkah back to the Dolphins. And I say back to because he was drafted by the Miami Dolphins. Didn't really expect for him to be part of that trade. Kind of figured that, oh man, that's weird. It's kind of felt like an all-in move from Pittsburgh. Now I'm just kind of like, yeah, that doesn't make a ton of sense. Maybe Minka Fitzpatrick wasn't happy about it. I don't know. I'm surprised that they didn't just cough up like a future second round pick or something like that. That's really, really weird. Wow, wasn't really expecting that. But anyway, doesn't change the fact that the Steelers and a lot of other teams are definitely going to be better than the Colts. And it's not a coincidence that all those teams that are definitely going to be better than the Colts, you haven't heard a peep from all off season. Meanwhile, the Colts, Zaire Franklin, let's just open our mouths and brag about stuff that a lot of other teams in the NFL did this past season. When we come back, here in about 5 minutes or so, Pacers, the offseason, guys who could potentially be on the move. What does this, their offseason kind of look like? Just knowing that they're not good enough to win the whole thing next year without Tyrese Halliburton. How do they navigate the cap? How do they, do they still willingly go into the first apron? Some different things that this could all be impacted by. I'll get into it when we come back at 11 o'clock.
Let's do this. It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket, 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. We got NFL trades going on right now. The Steelers acquiring Jalen Ramsey from the Miami Dolphins in exchange for Minkah Fitzpatrick. In addition to that, the Dolphins are sending Jonnu Smith, tight end, to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a late-round pick swap, whatever that means. So they probably just swapped their 6th-round picks or something like that. So, basically Jonnu Smith wanted money, and the Dolphins are like, yeah, we're not going to give you that money. And they were like, all right, then you can trade us. So, yeah, we'll see how it goes. C-Fitch, thanks for sending me the tweet. I already talked about that. We'll see. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that the Steelers are definitely better than the Colts. And, so it's just a weird trade. I don't really get it. Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Dolphins for Jalen. It just feels like neither team got better. It feels like both teams got bored. They're just like, hey, you want to do something? And then the Steelers are like, sure. What are you thinking? We'll send you Jalen Ramsey, and you can give us Minkah Fitzpatrick back, because the Dolphins did originally draft him. And then Minka's like, I don't want to play for Brian Flores. He's too mean. And so he, asked for a trade, and they sent him to Pittsburgh. And like when I first saw the trade, it made sense. It's like, all right, Steelers really believe in Aaron Rodgers. They've got Minkah Fitzpatrick, and they've got TJ Watt, and they've got Cam Hayward, and they're all kind of getting to the late parts of their prime. They make this trade for Jalen Ramsey. They're going for it. Then you learn that they gave up Minkah Fitzpatrick as opposed to just a 3rd-round pick. That just doesn't make a ton of sense. Like I said, it seems like both teams were just kind of bored, and so they did that. Anyway, Pacers. The offseason officially starts, or free agency officially starts in the NBA tonight at 6 o'clock. And Miles Turner, he's going to sign a new deal this offseason. Okay, it's probably going to be for somewhere around $30 million a year. That is what I am expecting. That's what I think he's worth. That's what Jared Allen is getting. But then again, he made that deal before the new CBA, so maybe they get him for a little bit cheaper. I forget who it was, but someone threw in the chat earlier that they heard that he was looking like a 3-year, $80 million deal. So we'll see. Either way, Miles Turner, he's coming back, and he should. And I know there's people out there like, Miles Turner, he's terrible. You're right. He's just so terrible that he was the starting center on a team that went to the NBA Finals. It's how bad Miles Turner is. Anyway, once that happens, once they, decide to re-sign Miles Turner for somewhere probably around $30 million a year, right? If it's, less than 25, I'll be really surprised. If it's more than 32 million a year, I will be surprised. Once that happens, the Pacers will enter what is known as the first apron. Okay. And I don't want to get into all the nitty-gritty stuff when it comes to the aprons, but essentially, once you enter that first apron, you then become restricted in trades that you can make. You can't sign certain players. So here's just a very brief synopsis of that. Whenever you make a trade, the salaries have to be very similar. So when you're not in the first apron, you can bring in, more money than you're sending out. Once you enter that first apron, that becomes a little bit more complicated, and it's a little bit tougher to do. Okay. You also can't do sign and trades unless the incoming player would then, put you below the apron. Okay. Teams can't sign players during the regular season if their previous salary was over, $12 million a year, which is the mid-level exception. And speaking of the mid-level exception, which is just another way to sign players, your mid-level exception price is reduced down to $5 million a year with a 2-year max for the players who sign it. So once you enter that first apron, you would then become slightly more restricted in what you can and cannot do. You also have to pay the luxury tax. And so the Pacers are probably sitting in that office right now, or they've probably already had this conversation, and they're trying to figure out, Is it worth going into the first apron and restricting ourselves a little bit and paying the luxury tax in a year where we're probably not going to win the NBA Finals because our best player, Tyrese Halliburton, is out for the following season? That's a great question. It's a question that they should be asking. And it's a question that they are asking because the Pacers are very well ran. So once the Pacers re-sign Miles Turner, because that is going to happen because they, know that in 2 years when the Pacers have another real shot to make another run at this, when Tyrese Halliburton is back, they're going to need Miles Turner. They need that stretch five who can protect the rim. Okay. And obviously once they re-sign him, they'll be in the first apron, which then restricts all those restrictions happen. Right. Because of that, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Pacers make a trade this offseason with the pure goal of just dumping some salary to avoid the luxury tax and to avoid being in that first apron. Okay, because, it's not just about that. It's not just about re-signing Miles Turner, but there are other Pacer players who can be extended, and when they are extended, they're going to need raises because all four of them are really good players. There are 4 players for the Indiana Pacers right now that are extension eligible. Okay, that is Aaron Nesmith, that is Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker, and Ben Shepherd. All 4 of those players are eligible for extensions right now. And I would argue that all 4 of them deserve extensions and raises. Okay, Aaron Nesmith is an excellent, excellent two-way player. A guy who impacts winning in the playoffs. And he's done it for 2 years in a row now. It wasn't just like this one-time thing. No, this is a guy who impacts winning right now. And the dude's making $11 million a year. And I think he's eligible for a 3-year extension. He's probably worth more than that. If the Pacers don't want to pay him that much, then I guarantee you there's another team out there who absolutely is more than willing to pay Aaron Nesmith, $15 million or 20 is probably a bit much. $15 million a year, though. A 3-and-D guy who can put it on the floor and, is athletic and he rebounds. They're going to want to extend Aaron Nesmith at some point. Benedict Mathurin, right? He can be extended now whenever they want to. I believe he was extension eligible this previous season. He's making a little over $9 million a year. He's worth more than that, especially if he's a guy that the Pacers think, could be around for the next, 5, 6, 7, 8 years and can kind of grow with Halliburton and eventually be that number 2 option offensively when Pascal Siakam gets a little bit older. Seems like he could be that. He's just the guy who scored 27 points in 22 minutes in a freaking NBA Finals game. Benedict Mathurin, they're probably going to want to keep that guy around. Okay, Jarris Walker. He hasn't done much yet, even though I do think that he will here at some point. He's slated to make, about a little over $6.5 million this next season. But look, if he comes back this year, and I think he's going to play quite a bit, and he's really good, then that's a guy that they're probably going to want to keep around. A guy who's only 22 years old right now. And then you have Ben Shepherd, who's making I think the number's $2 million a year. Right? Yeah. He's making $2.7 million a year. It's a guy who has contributed for the Indiana Pacers in the playoffs 2 years in a row. Another, solid defender who can make open threes. And it's always nice to have guys like that. I promise you that there's an NBA team out there who, who would be willing to give Ben Shepherd more than $2.7 million going forward. So all 4 of these guys are eligible for extensions. I believe that the Pacers want to keep them because all 4 of them are pretty good players. I think that if there was one guy that they wouldn't want to keep, it would be Ben Shepherd just because he seems like the most replaceable of all of them. With that being said, you have to have cap space to be able to do that. And you have to move pieces around to make that happen. Obi Toppin's making $14 million this year. That's a player who could potentially be traded in a salary dump. I think Benedict Mathurin could be as well. Just because of maybe not what Mathurin's making right now, but what he will be making here at some point during his career. So we'll see. With that being said, Obi Toppin is the guy who probably needs to be traded right now. If the Pacers are wanting to get under the tax and under that first apron. Okay, he's making $14 million a year, or that's how much he's going to make this year. Mathurin making a little over 9, so Obi Toppin's a little more expensive. Obi Toppin's also 27. Benedict Mathurin's only 23, right? With a higher ceiling, that's, I think, a little bit tougher to replace than Obi Toppin's ability to run the floor, dunk, and make open threes. Obi Toppin is the guy that I would trade. He's older. He, has an easier skill set to be replaced, and he costs more right now. In addition to that, you can sell pretty high on Obi Toppin right now. I guarantee you there are teams out there who would give up, maybe not a first round, who would give up something for Obi, like a real asset for Obi Toppin because of the playoffs that he just had. He clearly impacts winning not only in the regular season, but also in the postseason. But like this is a guy that teams would want, especially right now. I guess, in theory, they could also move McConnell, but TJ McConnell's, he's going to make $10.2 million this next year, and then his contract the next season, like, it's not fully guaranteed. So there's reason to keep TJ McConnell around. Obi Toppin, though, not really. Jarris Walker is also waiting in the wings. Jarris Walker just sitting there, buying time, just waiting for an opportunity to play. And the Pacers obviously like this guy. Obviously, like they wouldn't have used the 8th overall pick on him if they didn't like him. And, the trust factor, how much Coach Carlisle trusts Jarris Walker, clearly grew from his rookie year, where he barely played and got no real minutes in the playoffs, to this last year where he played a little bit more, and he was playing real minutes in the playoffs against the Bucks. He was playing real minutes in the playoffs against the Knicks, and then sadly he rolls his ankle, sprains it, and doesn't get an opportunity to play in the finals. That is a real player who is getting better year after year after year. He's a 40% 3-point shooter, okay, who projects, and I know we all love that word, projects and potential and all those things, but this is a guy who could potentially be a really good defender at some point down the line, something that Obi Toppin is not. Also, who are you going to replace Benedict Mathurin with? The answer is nobody. So we'll see what the Pacers wind up doing this offseason. We'll see if they even decide to dump salary. Maybe they're fine with the first apron, kind of dealing with that. Maybe they're fine with paying the luxury tax in a year where they're probably not going to be good enough to win the whole thing. We'll see, but that is something I think that people should keep an eye on. I got a tweet from Joe Humke before the show started, linking me to this Newsweek article. Don't read it. It's terrible. Basically, the Newsweek article makes a case for why the Pacers could potentially sign Ben Simmons. This is simply just a we want clicks article, because I think it's an absolute no. There's no way that the Pacers would sign Ben Simmons. Also, Joe Humke asked if Ben Simmons or DeAndre Ayton would fit the Pacers. When it comes to Ben Simmons, it's an absolute no. He's a tall guard who can't shoot, and more importantly, doesn't like playing basketball. Look, I think it's really important, if you want to be a great anything, then you better really like it. You better really enjoy it. And when it comes to Ben Simmons, he wants to show up at games. He wants to sit on the bench in his fit, as the kids call them now, and he doesn't want to do anything. He wants to play as little basketball as possible. And I get it. The idea of Ben Simmons is awesome. Hey, here's this really tall, athletic guard who, was made an all defensive team before and all these things. Yeah, he's not worth the headache. That's the very simple reality of Ben Simmons. He's simply not worth the headache. Okay? Like, this Pacers team, this Pacers roster is filled with guys who just like basketball. And that is so important. It is so important to have guys who just want to come to work every day and want to be part of a team and want to get better. Ben Simmons has been around a minute now. The guy hasn't gotten better. Okay? And, he does the same thing every offseason, right? Or every season. He barely plays, and then he goes into the offseason, and he makes all these, workout videos and, all the, the Bleacher Reports and all these accounts that, grab other people's videos or like, oh, Ben Simmons has a jumper, scary hours loading, or whatever it is. And then the season rolls around and he barely plays because he doesn't like playing basketball. It's an absolute no. He's just not a pacer in any way, shape, or form. The DeAndre Ayton thing is interesting because I've talked about it. The Pacers need an upgrade for their backup center. And the Pacers clearly like DeAndre Ayton's talent. I think a lot of teams like DeAndre Ayton's talent, right? He's a big 7-foot dude who moves well, and he's got good hands, and he's got soft touch around the rim and all that kind of stuff. And if you don't remember, the Indiana Pacers did offer DeAndre Ayton a contract the last time he was a free agent. So he was a restricted free agent. I believe that is what he was. And basically, the Suns were like, you contest free agency, but if someone else makes an offer, we're probably going to match it. So DeAndre Ayton, he hits free agency. Pacers extend him an offer sheet, and the Suns matched. And because of that, he had to go back and play for the Phoenix Suns. And that tells me that, like I said, they like the talent of DeAndre Ayton. But now that we've seen him play a little bit longer, in Phoenix, they had him for, that year. And then they traded him away because Chris Paul and Devin Booker and the rest of those guys couldn't stand how lazy and non-competitive he was. And then he goes to Portland, where he plays there for a year. And then they're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to draft Donovan Clingan with a lottery pick. And then the following year rolls around, this previous, NBA draft. I'm like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to draft another center. That's how little they thought of DeAndre Ayton. Okay, like he's simply, he doesn't play hard and he's not competitive. And I think that part of why the Pacers were as good as they were is because of how just competitive they were as a unit. So he gets, drafted, DeAndre Ayton. And, like after you get drafted, you do all those different interviews and they ask you questions. And he was asked, what's like your biggest goal in the NBA? Do you want to win a championship? You want to be a defensive player of the year? Do you want to win MVP? What is your biggest NBA goal? And usually players are like, I want to be the greatest of all time or whatever it is. That is not what DeAndre Ayton said. DeAndre Ayton said that his goal was to, quote, get a second contract. I don't think any team in any sport would want a player whose simple goal is just to get to the next contract, because those guys aren't competitive. They're in it for themselves, and they don't really love whatever sport they're playing. And in a league where everyone's talented, you got to have guys who love the sport and want to get better. DeAndre Ayton is not one of those guys, and I really hope that he is not a Pacer, even though the Pacers do need help at backup center. Okay, Malik Beasley needs help gambling, so if you have ideas, throw them his way. He's going to be in a lot of trouble, and we're going to talk about it when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
It may, one day, be a must-listen for sports enthusiasts.
Yeah, and monkeys might fly out of my butt.
Uh-oh. The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Thank you for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's YouTube, Indy Sports Ticket. If you want to head over there and subscribe, maybe you're watching on X, _ Jonathan Smith to follow me there. Maybe you're listening via that Indy Sports Ticket app. No matter how you're listening, it is always greatly appreciated. Malik Beasley, under investigation for gambling. Don't do it. Jonte Porter got banned for life for doing this, right? They set a real precedent. They were just like, look, man, this will not be tolerated under any circumstance. And Malik Beasley was going to get paid this offseason, right? The Pistons were ready to extend him an offer of $42 million over 3 years. That's a lot of money. That's $14 million a year. Wouldn't you like to make $14 million a year? I don't know. If I had to live in Detroit, I'd probably have to think about it, but I'd probably end up saying yes. And I just, man, like these guys, you're already making all that money. Like, why do you need to gamble? I don't get it. I'm sure that, someone way smarter than me could explain to you why they do this. I don't know, but it's just dumb. So Malik Beasley probably out of the league there for a little while after having a really good year, the best year of his career. Second in the league in made threes, shot like 40% from three, hit some big shots in the playoffs, and he's just gonna, give it all away. Crazy. Indiana football, they're giving nothing away. They are as quiet as a mouse. I haven't heard anything about Indiana football all off season. Nothing from Coach Cignetti. Nothing from the new starting quarterback. Nothing from anybody. Nothing. Not a single peep. And Indiana football was a lot of fun last year. Watching Coach Cignetti go on the air and, before the Notre Dame game and say, we don't just beat, ranked teams. We beat their you-know-what. And it's like, bro, you played one ranked team, Ohio State, and you got crushed. I get it. Nebraska was 25th in the coaches poll. They went 6-6. Jeez. And so, after a very loud in-season run from the Indiana Hoosiers, haven't heard anything from them this offseason. And I was thinking about it this weekend because, Indiana basketball got some new commit, and I saw a ton of stuff on it. And I had to ask this question of how much longer, or how long does Indiana have to be really good at football for it to stick? How long does Indiana have to be an awesome football team like they were last year? How many years do they have to have where they're really competitive and they're, competing for the college football playoff? How many years does that have to happen for Indiana to kind of have a slight shift? Because I do believe that it will always be a basketball school. But would you be surprised? I wouldn't be surprised if the year started and people were leaving at halftime of games. Wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. And I don't know if you remember this, but Coach Cignetti was, complaining quite a bit, at the start of last year about people, leaving games early. But I think people are going to leave early at the Old Dominion game. They'll leave the Kennesaw State game early. They'll leave the Indiana State game early. Wouldn't be surprised if they left the Illinois game early either. Wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. Just because this is still a basketball school. Like I said, I over the weekend, this, 4-star guy named Prince Alexander Moody, who's not even playing for Indiana basketball this year, right? He's going to be a senior, or will be a senior in high school. So he's got 1 year left. He's not even going to play basketball for Indiana this year. And I saw more stuff about him over the weekend in Indiana basketball than I have on Indiana football all off season. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay. Good teams tend to stay quiet. Good teams tend to not have very much drama and all those things. But I do think that it just states the obvious, something we already know. Indiana still very much a basketball school, even after that run where they go, 11-1 in the regular season and they lose in the first round of the college football playoff. And I don't think that Indiana is going to be very good this year. Or let me restate that. I don't think Indiana football will be as good this year as it was last year. They'll win their first 3 games. They'll beat Old Dominion and they'll beat Kennesaw State and they'll beat Indiana State. And then the Big Ten schedule is significantly tougher this year than it was last year. Last year, breeze, easy peasy, no big deal. Their best win was Nebraska, who went 6-6. But they beat Maryland, who wasn't very good. They beat Northwestern, who was terrible. They beat Washington, who wasn't very good. They beat Michigan State, who wasn't very good. They beat Michigan, who was okay. Didn't really have a quarterback. That game was tough. Then obviously, they get crushed by Ohio State, and then they crushed Purdue. It was a very easy schedule last year. The one this year, significantly tougher. Illinois would have been their best win last year. That was a team that was ranked, almost beat Penn State on the road. They're going to play at Iowa this year. That probably would have been their best win last year as well. And then they're at Oregon. So you just replace Ohio State with Oregon. Good luck. Michigan State, very winnable. UCLA, very winnable. Maryland, very winnable. At Penn State, you're not winning that one. Wisconsin at home, that game is very winnable. And then, of course, at Purdue as well. So I just the schedule is going to be tougher. I'm not convinced that they got significantly better. Are they going to be better? Sure, yeah, because Zach Calzada, the quarterback transfer from Cal, don't mind that. They're probably going to be a little bit better, but the schedule's tougher. If they go 9-3 or 8-4, are people going to lose interest in this Indiana football team, especially later in the year? Because it doesn't feel like it right now, but I do think people are excited about Darian DeVries and what the Indiana basketball program is going to look like with him in charge. And their season starts during college football season, November 9th against Marquette. That is their first game. A day after Indiana is probably going to lose to Penn State in football on November 8th. So what I'm really curious to see, I have November 8th and 9th circled on my calendar because I think it's just going to be a very interesting day in the world of Indiana sports where we have this very rare crossover between football and basketball. If Indiana goes to Penn State and they get crushed, which is what I kind of expect to happen, Penn State is a team that has national title, hopes this year for the, umpteenth year in a row. And if they get crushed by Penn State, if they go there and they lose by 4 touchdowns, it's not really a contest. And then November 9th, Indiana beats Marquette. What happens, those final couple weeks of the Indiana football season? Do people lose interest if that's their 3rd or 4th loss of the year? How do things go from there? I'm very intrigued to kind of see how that later part of their schedule, relates with college basketball starting. So we'll see. We'll see. Because, if Indiana basketball wins that game against the Marquette team that I expect to be good, because I just kind of expect for every Shaka Smart coach team to be good, then I expect for them to take a step back. Then I expect for the football team to kind of take a back seat to the start of college basketball season. But we're not quite there yet. Football is just around the corner. We got NFL training camp starting up here in about 3 weeks, right? July 21st, I believe, is the first day of camp for the Indianapolis Colts. That marks the start of the Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones battle to be the starting quarterback of one of the worst teams in the NFL. I think that's what we're headed for. 7.5 wins feels like a lot for this Colts team that I'm just not convinced is going to be very good. Right? They lose 2 of their, they lose an offensive guard, in Will Fries, who was really good for them last year. Ryan Kelly's gone. I get it. Tanner Bortolini, great start to the year. But the longer he played center, the worse that offensive line got. Braden Smith is back. Yay. Can he play a full season? Probably not. Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson, who's going to be the starting quarterback? doesn't feel like it matters. Feels like the quarterback play isn't going to be good one way or the other. Oh, but Jonathan, you don't understand. We got Tyler Warren. That's cool. That's great. So glad that we got Tyler Warren. Doesn't matter if the offensive line doesn't block long enough, and it definitely doesn't matter if the quarterback taking the snap isn't very good. And I don't think Daniel Jones is very good, and I don't think Anthony Richardson is very good. Okay, it's going to be a long, brutal season for the Indianapolis Colts and for Indianapolis Colts fans. Oh, but the defense, yeah, you got better at corner. That's cool. You got better at safety. The linebacker positions, though, still have major question marks. And unless Latu, really develops and becomes a guy off the edge, pass rush I don't expect to be very good either. What is 31-year-old DeForest Buckner going to lead the way with 8.5 sacks again? It's not good. Who are the Colts legitimately better than? 6 teams. That's like the Colts are, definitely going to be the 7th best team in the NFL or better. The issue is I don't know how much better they're going to be. Okay, like who are the Colts legitimately better than? I'm going to answer that question when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
The best takes. Maybe. The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket 1430 AM, 93.9 HD2, and always on the free Indy Sports Ticket app.
Welcome back to the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Thank you for tuning in, no matter how you're tuning in, whether that's YouTube, Indy Sports Ticket. If you want to head over there and subscribe, maybe you're watching on X, _ Jonathan Smith. So follow me there, watch the show there. You can also listen on that Indy Sports Ticket app, which you can download wherever you find your apps. Now, the Colts, who are they better than? Seriously, like who are the Colts legitimately better than? It's a very short list of teams that I'm just like, yeah, the Colts are better than them. And then the list of teams that they're not better than is rather long. They're not better than the Bills. They're not better than the Ravens. They're not better than the Steelers, who just traded for Jalen Ramsey today, and Jonnu Smith, two guys that are going to show up and have a pretty positive impact pretty quickly. They now have two real tight ends between Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith. They've got two real cornerbacks now between Porter and Ramsey. I know they got rid of Minkah Fitzpatrick in the process, but he's, on like the back half of his prime. Like he's, I'd rather have Jalen Ramsey than Jonte Porter. Or excuse me, than Minkah Fitzpatrick. Like, they got better. They're going to be better than the Colts. Aaron Rodgers, I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be better than Richardson or Daniel Jones. The Texans, I expect to be better than the Colts. The Chiefs are going to be better than the Colts. The Chargers, the Broncos, the Eagles, the Commanders, the Lions, the Packers, the Rams, and the 49ers. All of those teams are going to be better than the Indianapolis Colts. They have a better quarterback, every single one of them, and they probably have a better head coach. And I like a lot of those defenses more than I like the Colts defense as well, because yes, I know that the secondary got better. But you know what didn't get better? Unless Leatu Latu comes back a stud? The defensive line. How are they going to generate a pass rush? The linebackers, are you sure they got better? You still have, your best linebacker is still the guy who leads the league in missed tackles since 2023, Zaire Franklin. I just find it hard to believe that this Colts team is going to get to that 8-win mark to cash the over. I don't think there's enough talent on the roster, right? And then you get to this second tier of teams that has a question, but I don't think I would be surprised if the Colts were better than the Vikings, the Patriots, the Bengals, the Cowboys, Bears, Buccaneers, or Seahawks. Like the Vikings, if JJ McCarthy's good, which I expect for him to be because Kevin O'Connell just kind of finds a way for quarterbacks to be productive. Like the Colts aren't going to be better than the Vikings if JJ McCarthy's good. Drake May was a good rookie quarterback last year. Mike Vrabel's the new head coach in New England. They're going to be better. Just because Drake May's a year older and they hired a really good head coach. I would be surprised if the Colts were better than the Patriots. The Bengals, I had to put them in this tier because they've missed the playoffs 2 years in a row and they've changed some staff and they haven't signed their first round pick yet and all this kind of stuff. But if Joe Burrow and the Bengals were not better than the Colts, I would be stunned. I think the Cowboys are going to be a pretty solid team this year. They're going to score a lot of points. Okay, the Bears, if Ben Johnson is being a B- head coach, that's a major upgrade over Eberflus, who was, a D+ head coach at best. Okay? So they're going to be better. The Buccaneers just wake up and win 10 games every year. The Seahawks, if Sam Darnold is able to, be solid as a quarterback, then they'll be better than the Colts. Yeah, sure. All those teams that I just listed have a question or two, but I feel pretty good about where their answer is going to go. And the answer is probably pretty positively. All those teams should be better than the Colts. And then you get to this third tier of teams compared to the Colts where it's I don't know, they feel similar, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were better than the Colts. For example, the Dolphins. If the Dolphins just decided to lead the NFL in scoring this year, that wouldn't be surprising. And if they lead the NFL in scoring, then they're probably going to win a lot of games, including that Week 1 game against the Indianapolis Colts. The Jacksonville Jaguars hired a new head coach who, revived isn't the right word, but he helped Baker Mayfield put together the best season of his career. Okay? And if he does that with Trevor Lawrence, then watch out. The Jaguars are going to be pretty good. Like, they've got two guys who, coming off the edge can really rush the passer. They add Travis Hunter, who's going to play both ways. If he can just be decent on both sides of the ball, then, that's a guy who, that's a net positive. And then, Trevor Lawrence, if he's good, then, it wouldn't be the most, I wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars were better than the Colts. The Raiders bring in Geno Smith. They hire Pete Carroll and upgrade a head coach and upgrade a quarterback. They're going to be better than they were last year. The issue is that division's pretty tough. But if the Raiders beat the Colts, I wouldn't be surprised by that in the slightest. The Falcons, if Michael Penix is good and he looked good at the end of last year after he took over for Kirk Cousins, they wouldn't be surprising if they were better than the Colts. The Cardinals, if Kyler Murray stays healthy, I wouldn't be surprised if they were better than the Colts. The only teams that are definitely worse than the Colts are the Saints, the Panthers, the Jets, and I'm not even convinced on the Jets one. The Browns, Titans, and Giants. That is the list. Those are the teams that I feel like the Colts are absolutely better than. And that's really it. Are we sure this team's going to win 8 games? Are we sure that they're a playoff team? I can't. I want to bet the Colts over 7.5 wins so badly. And I can't. I can't. Jeez. Golly. Anyway, the Colts, they're going to be bad. And we're going to have to sit here through it one more year. And then I think we'll finally see a change in that Indianapolis Colts front office. I think this is the year where Chris Ballard finally gets fired. I think this is the year where Shane Steichen is finally let go. And the Colts restarted completely next year. Right? They draft a new quarterback. They bring in Drew Aller or something because they're not going to be bad enough to have the number 1 overall pick. But, they'll bring in a Drew Aller. Might even give Riley Leonard some snaps. And we'll just kind of see where things go from there. But I don't know. I think this Colts team is terrible. And, it's hard to be good when Zaire Franklin is one of your leaders. Last week, I was nice to the Colts. I was a really nice guy. I was very, I complimented them quite a bit last week on just staying quiet. Like they weren't doing all this nonsense. They were having a relatively normal offseason. Obviously, there was discussion around Anthony Richardson's shoulder and how he went back out to LA to, get his shoulder looked at again. But that got cleared up. He's going to be ready for training camp here in about 3 weeks, right? And we're going to get to talk about this Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson quarterback battle, right? We're going to get to talk about it because he's going to be healthy. That got that got cleaned up. That's really been the only drama for the Indianapolis Colts all offseason, which felt unusual. Usually, this team finds a way to be discussed in some way, shape, or form. And then, Zaire Franklin decided to be Zaire Franklin and, just give us something to talk about, which, as a radio show host, I do greatly appreciate. But as someone who wants to see the Colts do well, it's not good. It's not good. It's really interesting. Only the bad teams are allowed. So, Zaire Franklin tweeted something, and he gets this response from some fan or whatever who said, which team are you going to call out this year? Last year was the Giants, and they dropped 45 points on you, and which is true. Great call. And then Zaire Franklin responds to the tweet by saying that he called out the Titans last year, and the Colts swept them. Man, who cares? No one cares that you swept the Titans, Zaire. No one cares in the slightest. Congratulations. You swept the worst team in the NFL. You swept the team that got the number 1 overall pick. Okay, like they probably wanted for you to to sweep them. Seriously, I mean, it's just dumb, man. It's tone deaf. It's just like the lack of realization from him is incredible. Like, congratulations, man. Like, you did what you were supposed to do. You beat the worst team in the NFL twice. Zaire Franklin bragging about sweeping the Titans is the equivalent of Indiana basketball bragging about beating Rutgers. Like, you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to do that. I mean, who cares? Come on. Congratulations. You beat the worst team in the NFL twice. Every team in the NFL did that. And guess what, Zaire? You're expected to do it again this year. Even though they have a new quarterback, they should still be terrible. And, and this is year 10 or whatever it is of the Chris Ballard era. We're up and running. We're up and running, guys. I mean, just incredible. Just stop talking. It's not a coincidence that the best teams in the NFL don't say stuff like this. Like, you haven't heard anything from the Bills. Okay, like you haven't heard anything coming out from the 49ers. No nonsense from Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, the Rams. The Packers are never in the news. The Lions, a team that used to be terrible and used to be discussed all the time because they were doing dumb stuff in the offseason. Guess what? I haven't heard a peep from them these last couple of years. You heard anything from Washington? From the Commanders? I haven't. The Eagles? It's amazing. Guys go to Georgia. They speed. They get all these speeding tickets. And then they go play for the Eagles. And you never hear about them doing dumb stuff ever again. The Broncos went from Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson being loud and drawing all this attention to Sean Payton and Bo Nix. And it's amazing. Even though they were still paying Russell Wilson to go play quarterback for the Steelers last year, they won more games because they were just, about their business. They weren't bragging about sweeping the freaking Tennessee Titans. The Chargers, guess what they did? They hired Jim Harbaugh, got serious, stopped talking, stopped being loud and annoying and saying ridiculous things and drawing unneeded attention. And they made the playoffs last year. And they were a good football team. And guess what? They're a good football team again this year who has like a legitimate chance to win the AFC West. That's how good the Chargers could be this year. The Chiefs are a bad example because they always have someone doing something dumb. But, the Steelers, there's never any nonsense coming out of them. The Ravens keep a pretty tight lid on things. The Vikings, you never hear about them doing anything dumb. Mike Vrabel coached teams. Now the Patriots, you don't hear about them doing anything dumb. The Buccaneers, who have been good pretty consistently for the past, 5, 6, 7 years now. Never hear any peep out of them. And then the Colts. You got one of the leaders of your defense. The leader of your defense. The guy that you told Anthony Richardson to watch how he leads. You got that guy bragging about beating the Tennessee Titans. Only the Colts. Only the Colts. On top of it, this is also your linebacker who's missed more tackles than any other linebacker in the NFL since 2023. This is the guy that you've got out front running his mouth. Not like DeForest Buckner, who's, at least played in a Super Bowl. No. It's Zaire Franklin. And I'm really intrigued to hear what his podcast sounds like this year now that EJ Speed is gone. Are we just going to have like a rotating panel of co-hosts? Are we just like going to bring in all the different linebackers from the linebacker room? Like how is this going to work? You're going to bring Coach Steichen on? That would be fun. Talk about dumb stuff. He went on Joe Budden's podcast as well and said more dumb things. It's just incredible, man. Like, someone has to get a hold of that dude and be like, hey, Zaire, we haven't made the playoffs in 5 years. How about we win some games against teams not picking first overall before we start running our mouths? It's incredible, man. Only the Colts, only the Colts. In case you missed it, big news of the day, the Pittsburgh Steelers traded Minkah Fitzpatrick and some late round picks to the Miami Dolphins for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. And the Steelers got better. Doesn't seem like the Dolphins did. But, we'll see. Only time will tell if any of those trades end up working out or not. That's good for the Colts. You don't have to worry about playing against Jalen Ramsey. So now when Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson makes a mistake week 1, you don't have to worry about a guy who has been, one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL, looking over your shoulder or waiting for those mistakes time and time again. So we'll see how it goes. But the Nate Ockett Show coming your way next on a beautiful, beautiful Monday. Should be Todd Leary, Ken Sterling for the Power Hour, all those great things. Hopefully you enjoyed the show today. Come back tomorrow, 10 to noon, as always, to tune into the real Jonathan Smith Show. We're going to talk more Colts. I got some Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones stuff that I didn't quite get to today, so we'll talk about that tomorrow as I get you ready for that quarterback competition, right? So going to be interesting. Can't wait. Colts training camp. We're about 3 weeks away from it. The NBA free agency stuff kicks off tonight at 6:00. Hopefully, we're going to find out about Miles Turner pretty quickly. So the Nate Ockett Show coming your way next from noon to 3, and I'll be back tomorrow from 10 to noon, and I'll talk to you